I mean, that's where like relative motion of all the joints of the body play a role in your arm care, your post throw. If you're an overhead athlete and you've been told that you need to improve shoulder range of motion, go back and watch our video on relative motion, because that's something that just based on that context, if someone said that to you, you've lost some relative motion, which we know is a normal component of throwing. So if you've been told that you have limited shoulder range of motion, whichever way, up, down, sideways, whatever way it is, you lose relative motion, you lose range of motion after a high intensity throwing session generally. Yeah, with that, I mean, that's been known for since before I was in the industry for sure.
right?
So
Before I was
you
born,
can,
I think.
yeah, definitely. You can acutely decrease range of motion at the shoulder, so you can acutely decrease relative motion because the body is trying to figure out a way to produce force. And the easiest way for the body to produce force at a high level is by locking segments and joints together to create like a real high pressure force production organism or entity, whatever you want. Ooh, that sounded kind of weird. We got to figure out ways to restore it. And the first thing that in my brain that I think of is if you can acutely decrease range of motion, you should be able to acutely increase range of motion. And that's where I think I got it wrong the first 7 or 8 years of my career was, oh yeah, you're going to lose range of motion after throwing, do the scap routine, do your rotator cuff program, ride your bike, do your flush, whatever little,
There's evidence to why like people feel good after
yeah. No,
jumping on a bike, right? Like that in itself will improve your
that's fair. But then the question is how much, to what extent is it increasing range of motion? Is it increasing the right range of motion? Because the big thing that I've been getting into is like reorienting sockets, because that's where I feel like I'm having a hard
I
time
wanted
with
to
a lot of
talk
my
about that.
clients.
Yeah.
I've I haven't been doing enough diligent job of working on that, and that's a whole nother that's
I
a
mean, that
talk that
goes
we can
back
have.
to why pitchers lose range of motion in the first place, right? Like we could talk about that a little bit. Like the shoulder is just getting twisted out, and then eventually that's gonna change
Yeah, I
the
mean,
angle
I
of
think
the
I think
socket.
you can even keep it more simple than that, and you can talk about humeral retroversion, because
Right?
some people's brains will have a hard time thinking that our sockets can orient. But we know from cadaver studies, we know from we know from a lot of different things that humeral retroversion is a thing. So your humerus over time will twist and allow you to probably have more external rotation. So that would be, let's use an example. Let's say pitcher A throws a bullpen and he loses shoulder internal rotation, let's call it like he loses like 20 to 30% of shoulder internal rotation. But then all you have him do is supine ball drops and prone on the table, like scaption raises and like a standing like cable reverse fly. You're not going to improve hip shoulder internal rotation because you haven't addressed that big twist at the shoulder. And that's where some of my mentors have kind of talked me through, like a lot of the rotator cuff stuff. If it's a pretty high impulse, so let's say like a sideline, I'm on my side and I'm dropping a ball, and those seem to work and to restore shoulder internal rotation because you're first correcting that big twist of the humerus, the bone. And so now you're reducing humeral retroversion. And so the humerus is going to sit in a better
You're
position.
talking
So
about
with,
like the ball drops, right?
yeah, like a sideline ball drop,
Everyone's doing those right now. Yeah, we could
which,
talk about
which
that.
they're called for rotator cuff health, which sure, but it's also re, it's helping reorient the shoulder socket because now the humerus doesn't have this big, like, distal, would that be distal ER?
So you're saying that that's gonna because of the impulse, like the drop, and then like that I mean, I'm thinking of like a contraction, but like how would you that impulse of like that change of momentum, the ball's dropping, and then you have to like
Uh-huh.
redirect the energy. You're saying that
I
that's
wouldn't I wouldn't
gonna
I wouldn't even say I
twist,
wouldn't even say a redirect. Just a catch. And that was kind of a cool insight of like maybe that's how some rotator cuff exercises actually improve shoulder IR because you're just helping reorient the humerus and that allows so then you would lose some shoulder external rotation, which is probably not a bad thing to lose in that sense.
we're still kind of talking about like relative motion and from a broad sense, right?
And then I mean, not to go too far down a rabbit hole, but
We can
we're
save that
looking
for
at
part two.
yeah, we're looking at it from like a kind of a scoped in view, I guess, of a shoulder. But I mean, that's where like relative motion of all the joints of the body play a role in your arm care, your post throw. I mean, it really just depends. That's where you need a practitioner that's gonna look at you from 1,000 foot view and come up with a plan pre and post throw. Because, like, I mean, think about the velocities that you're creating when you throw a baseball. You're going to inadvertently, and it doesn't matter how well you move, you're going to create story pattern, and some of
Right,
them are probably, and I mean, probably most of them are something that you need to throw at a high level. It's just controlling those. I mean, we're not talking like there's a test tube pitcher out there that like doesn't have any range of motion law. Like that's not a thing.
right. I think you have to clarify that. Yeah, like a little disclaimer for everyone watching.
Yeah.
Like if you want to throw hard, and I mean, honestly, like 80 miles an hour, like
Yeah.
Dr. Andrews, it was like a while back, he was talking about that. Like they know from the research they've done that 80 miles an hour is enough to tear your UCL. Like the
Yeah.
UCL really is not capable of withstanding that amount of force. So I think that like kids aren't dealing with this yet. I mean, some of them are. Like some kids have arm pain. I've met kids that are like 11 years old and they were like, dealing with arm pain, and it's like a big deal. Um, this conversation's about like why relative motion or like why pitchers lose range of motion. Like we know this for a long time that over the course of a season. I mean, that's what the two-out drill study was about too, right? Like
Uh-huh.
how to preserve shoulder range. They were only looking at the shoulder, right? Like that study.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
mean, that's another interesting topic. Is like there's a ton of
Within a game.
within a single game. Yeah, within a single game, they're finding that it's like really important to preserve that internal rotation and shoulder flexion and all that stuff. Um, but I feel like that's where we have kind of like missed the mark a little bit with the arm care, and we talked about this in the health and performance pyramid video. It's like the same thing. It's like you want to learn how to throw hard, you're going to need to increase the amount of external rotation you have. You're going to get these twists in your bones. And then at the end of the season, if you're not restoring that range of motion, it's not just going to go back to normal. Like your posture isn't just going to like become uh,
Hmm.
good or neutral or
I
whatever
mean,
the word is.
the perfect example is the guys that that we've all worked with in the past. They go off to college and don't necessarily have arm pain or fatigue. So like, their velo starts dumping, but
Yeah,
they don't hurt. They've been told to take some time off, so they're not in fatigue, but now they just can't regain any velo. And like, what's the answer? Oh, you're not strong enough. They've still been hitting the weight room. Like they haven't lost any strength. Like, where's the velo drop? Maybe the right shoulder's pointed out to freaking third base now, and now their timing's way off. Now that's taken. Now you have to take like the pitching mechanics to help solve that equation, and
right.
you need to look and be like, okay, so they're getting to the same spot at front foot plant, but how they got there, now they're having to create a side bend early, which is causing them to lose their back heel, and they're getting outside base support. And now when they're coming down the hill, like that's where the eyes for the specific task that they're supposed to do on the field plays a big role because you're like, yeah, no, it makes sense. You're not in pain, not fatigued. You've taken time off, but your velocity's down. Oh, your right hip and right shoulder both have 20 to 30 degrees less internal rotation than they used to. Yeah, you're not able to put any downforce in the ground. Oh, your lower left back hurts now too, but your arm doesn't hurt. But your lower left back gets tight every time you throw. They're
Right,
not really
right. It's
relating
like,
the
oh, my
two.
arm is fine, but my knee is hurting or my back.
Hmm.
Yeah,
It's like, okay, well, something has changed. And that's really where I think in season training, especially in season arm care, but even just, I mean, we could talk a whole nother time on strength and conditioning. That's where I think that needs,
yeah, that's a separate.
that's what I take the off season for really in the sun. So like, let's use my college pitchers that have their last bullpen here in 30 minutes. Last bullpen of the summer before they go up to the fall. Now we know by getting through the summer, we kind of have a general idea because I've tested them pre and post pens, pre and post lives, kind of what happens to their body after they throw. And that's something that we got to address all
Talk
fall.
about that. Like, what's a case study on that of like acute
Um,
changes? Because I think a lot of people don't really understand that. Just like
yeah, I mean, I'm second guessing
how immediate the changes are. Like, it's kind of crazy
yeah,
when you
I,
actually table test people.
I'm second guessing one of my guys' table of measures just because I think I was measuring his shoulder and throw rotation, or I'm measuring it okay, but the context I'm using, and that's a whole nother talk you and I can have because that'll confuse people. But big old right-handed pitcher Hutch, which I'm gonna have to spend probably a whole day getting all the videos organized from these guys so we can post them a little bit so people can see. So Hutch,
He's
big
a hard
right-handed
thrower, right?
pitcher.
He's 90-mile-an-hour
Yeah,
arm.
he's like I think he's been 89 to 91 this summer. And we've really only thrown probably one max effort pen really. So he is a guy that his shoulder range of motion doesn't necessarily change that much post throw. And not to throw people off, but I'll throw this in there. I think it's because he gets more of a thoracic anterior orientation after throwing. And so his internal
Yeah.
rotation looks pretty good. But he doesn't really lose shoulder external rotation. But his left hip, one, I have a hard time gaining hip external rotation on him. He has
We're
a
talking about a
couple,
right-handed pitcher.
yeah, right-handed pitcher. He has a kind of, I have a hard time gaining hip external rotation on him. He's got some compensatory patterns that are pretty tough to deal with. He's a narrow, uh, but his left hip gets beat up, especially his old mechanics, which, you know, look through our YouTube and eventually you'll see some of these. Uh, so was with me in high school, solid mechanics, threw hard, good athlete down the mound. Some interference happened last summer. He went to play summer ball and he started getting real divey up top, like way out front up top, super divey. Lost all spin, lost a lot of velo, didn't have it all spring this
He
spring,
said
didn't
his
look
arm
great.
slot dropped down too, right? Wasn't that
Yeah,
one that
he
he
started getting really pushy and out front and like I think someone
late
tried to tell
arm,
him to
early
yeah,
trunk rotation?
I think someone tried to get him to drop his arm slot. He's still, even with his mechanics being a heck of a lot better, he still gets like left hamstring tightness and left hip loses a lot, like almost all external rotation. And so his post throw is just recapturing that because so think about that. Like if he's going to be a reliever and he's got to throw 2 days in a row and he feels good his first day and he throws well, but we don't he just does a general arm care routine with the rest of the team. And then he has to throw the next. If anyone's watched these videos that have kind of looked at like how I really relate range of motion to timing, and that's the easiest thing to relate with athletes in real time in a session is like, hey, when you don't have this range of motion, it means you have no space to get up and over your front side. So then you're going to have to side bend or get pushy over the top, blah, blah, blah. So that's going to create a timing issue. If we look at everything in still frames, the you're going to be at different spots at different times. And so good luck
Yeah.
trying to even maintain. I mean, pitching and hitting is rhythm and timing. And if you're having different range of motions every time you go throw, you're going to have to compensate to create different patterns to have different timing windows
Right.
to try to make up for that. And only the guys that are on TV are probably good enough to make those kind of changes without even thinking about it.
I was gonna say that too, is a lot of those guys are just so good at, like, some of the athletes that I've worked with too, is like they're just so good at cheating it and like
They're unicorn.
fi-
They're unicorns.
finding that release point. But it's different each time, and like
Yeah, I mean,
it's not relative motion. Like those side
yeah,
bends that they're doing, those
yeah,
twists through the neck. It's like
yeah,
they're doing that because they're trying to find internal rotation. Or they're trying to put force into the ground.
yeah,
So
and
yeah,
it's
I mean
super
that's just
subtle,
something I've
but
seen a lot too.
yeah, it's super subtle. But when I'm watching games on TV, that's why I don't honestly watch any sports because I just get so just lasered in on trying to find every little thing wrong I can and the little changes that guys make. And you can see it. I mean, even the guys that get paid 30, 40 million a year lose their time every once in a while. I think I know why it is, but that's another talk. We're not here to bash on guys that have thousands of strikeouts in big leagues because that ain't me.
Right?
As Dom would say, every once in a while you need to keep your mouth shut. You got no pumps in the show, kid.
Is that what he tells you?
Yeah, every once in a while when I get on my high horse, when we're talking hitting, say, hey, remember, you got no pumps in the show. It's like you're right,
Right?
you're right. That's really where I think arm care needs to switch to like just post throw. Like people can call it recovery, you can call it whatever you want, but it's more than just the arm because like this fall, if we don't manage that with him, he's gonna have a hell of a time
And
competing
it's
in,
so gradual too. Like that
yeah,
decline, and so gradual. It's hard to just like
yeah, and
pinpoint.
that's where like I think everyone's really close because they're starting to take, my big thing 4 or 5 years, guys would leave for the fall. College guys would leave for the fall, and their velo would be, let's call it 90, just to make an easy round number. And then by the end of the fall, they're 88. And it's like, why is no one having this? Why are we not having? He's not throwing as hard. You need
But
to find a
it's not
reason
like this
why.
huge drop that people
No,
can blame it, right? It's like it's really hard to pinpoint the,
yeah,
because a lot of people are like, oh yeah, you just need to rest. Like you just need to get stronger.
yeah,
You just need to do
and
some
that
yoga or whatever. Like
and that was before like Rapsodo and TrackMan were really big. So I'm sure you were seeing major metrics changes with pitches, but
yeah.
just not it wasn't something that was either recorded or thought of. And it's all gradual. You're right. I mean, it could be just a tiny little head tilt starts happening,
And pitchers
or
feel it too. That's the thing. You'll
mhm,
talk to these
yeah,
like really elite throwers, and they're so aware of like the slightest. It's like, oh yeah, I'm stepping off towards first a little bit more, or like
yeah,
my arm slot dropped, or I'm getting
yeah,
lazy sink. Like I felt it in my career where like I lost the ability to get that. I used to have like a really good bite to my slider, and it would drop off the table, and then you start to lose that
hmm,
release point. Your slot starts to drop down, your arm gets late, and then now all of a
hmm,
sudden your slider doesn't bite anymore. It's like that backup slider where you're throwing the cement mixer, or now
yeah.
your two seamer is like more of a sinker instead of like that true two seam that runs.
and
But that
then and
right,
then to try to get the same outcome as you used to get, now you're having to try harder, you're having to use more tension,
yeah.
now you're losing even more relative motion, now you're really off the beaten path, now you're really spiraling, now you're really locking segments up, now you have no hip shoulder separation anymore, now you're velous, then it's like the snowball effect isn't gradual anymore, now it's compounding, and now you're pulling off everything. You can't throw a freaking strike. Then velo plummets, and then all of a sudden, elbow or shoulder pain. And you're like, how did I get
Oh,
here?
but though you just got to
See,
go work with like a sports psychologist to get
yeah.
rid of the yips, right? Like
Tell
it's all in your
tell all my
head.
Tell all my guys sitting over here now that it's all in your head.
Literally, I
Uh,
hear that all the time. It's like, oh, just those strikes. Like, you just gotta lower the intent so you can hit the
yeah,
mitt. And it's like, dude,
yeah.
like throwing a strike shouldn't be that hard. You have a, I mean, hitting your spot is that's a myth. Like big
That's a
leaguers,
yeah.
yeah, big leaguers don't even hit, like they execute a pitch. It's a certain profile or whatever. But like, there's only probably like a couple pitchers on the planet that have ever actually like really hit their spot, in my
I
opinion.
gotta do some homework and look back at my notes because I was talking with one of my hitting coaches that works with a bunch of big leaguers, and he was talking about
Execute pitches. And I think it's pretty apparent, like a changeup or a breaking ball or something, where like you can't like the margin for error with a good breaking ball is so much smaller than like, oh
yeah,
yeah, you can throw your fastball for a strike, but the spin profile is like really average. You know, like
yeah,
I think that's something I see a lot with big leaguers is like their velocity hasn't changed, but the profile of their pitch is like really average now, and so they think something hasn't changed. But it's like, dude, your fastball is super flat, and like you're only
mm-hmm.
throwing 94, 95. Like there's right.
Guys are gonna tee off on that.
So
Uh,
it's cool to see
yeah,
that now that we have the Rap Soto and the TrackMan and stuff. But
yeah.
before, like the old timers, like they knew that, like intuitively, they could tell that their baseball wasn't spinning the same way.
Mm-hmm. And so to kind of recap, and I mean that's where like relative motion of all the joints of the body play a role in your arm care, your post throw. When we're our remote clients and we're looking at posture photos and we're looking at some of the self tests that you and I talked about earlier today, I think either before recording or early on, like that's what we're trying to come up with is whatever tools in our toolbox we can to restore relative motion in what we believe is going to set someone up, like at least keep them on the straight and narrow and not make them worse, really. And that's, I mean, that can be breathing exercises, that could be certain strength exercises that elicit changes in orientation of musculature. Where, I mean, I guess for the layman's terms, like you find that some antagonist musculature groups of what you're trying to chill out. Like obviously, we talk about concentric and eccentric
Recording.
orientation, but I don't think that's the common
Yeah.
language for a lot of people.
People are talking about like weakness and tightness and stuff, which
Yeah, I mean,
is too non-specific for our
the guy,
definitions.
the young man that you started working with, I don't think weakness is his issue. He's
Hey, he
got too
said
much.
that. He said his shoulders are moving though.
Yeah, I mean,
There's
it's
some
not.
interference there with his lifting program, but he did say that like his shoulder blade's actually moving for the first time in like 2 years. So I thought
There
that
you
was
go.
pretty encouraging. It's
There
only
you
been two
go. And
weeks.
that's not because it's weak.
Yeah, well,
Like the kid's a brick shit house.
he's a beast. Yeah, if you've seen that kid work out, you're like, dang, like I'm
Yeah,
soft.
yeah. So that's why I think like it's all dependent on that situation that client is in. Like I have some narrow guys, so it'd be like in general speaking, it'd be like I have a couple young Gumby, tall, skinny pitchers, and I have them do some specific cable split squat exercises to try to get certain musculature of the lower half to help the pelvis move appropriately. And in turn, if the pelvis moves appropriately, that's going to create some good timing of the lower half, help a little more with hip shoulder separation. Maybe we don't have to worry about relative motion at their shoulder because they're going to be in the right position and they have good enough relative motion. Or it's someone that does need to do some all fours breathing before they go throw because we need to get some pump handle and we need to get some posture changes. Or maybe it's someone that needs to do an arm bar with a corkscrew pattern to try to get some orientation of some certain musculature to allow for them to get layback and not use that trap, and then everything kind of turns as one piece. Maybe it's my favorite one is maybe it's a specific bicep curl variation post throw to recapture some range of motion and to layer some internal rotation so that humerus isn't just spun all out behind them. And so if they have to throw the next day, they don't have too much layback, or they don't have a shoulder socket that's oriented out, or it's for some guys maybe it's just post throw they do a diagonal separation to reorient their landing leg hip socket so that they're able to have proper timing the next day, and they're able to get hip shoulder separation, and the pelvis isn't just going to turn and move as one whole piece. Or they don't get good lead leg block because of that, or they have hamstring soreness after throwing one day. And I think relative motion is probably the most important piece for rotational athletes. So
To
stop
keep
doing
them
farmers
healthy,
carries
yeah.
stop doing super heavy farmers carries. Stop doing Nordic hamstring extensions
Wait. What
for
about
sure.
Nordic hamstrings? I thought that was the number one. I thought that was the number one exercise to reduce hamstring strains. It's
In
clinically
that
proven.
study,
I thought.
in a couple of studies compared to God knows what. But that's neither here nor there with the certain
Right.
people that have gone
Maybe that
arguments.
was a tangent, but I hear that a lot.
But
Oh,
go like this is what I said to actually I said this to a baseball pitching coach the other week. I said he's a big golfer. And I was like, go do some heavy deadlifts and some partner Nordic hamstring curls, and then go freaking hit a golf ball and tell me how you feel. You're gonna feel like shit. And if you tell me you feel good, you're lying, or you're
just look at the way people do that exercise. Like you can't like maybe your hamstrings are getting stronger, but like the position that you just reinforced, I mean, what happens when you, and we'll use some dirty words, but like anterior tilt, right? Like everyone knows, everyone talks about like anterior pelvic tilt and stuff, but like
Mhm.
what does that do to the muscles on, so your pelvis just tipped forward, right? What does that do to your center of mass? What does that do to the muscles on the back side of your body, like the hamstrings that you're trying to strengthen? What length and like orientation does that put the muscles in, and what side of the body has more leverage? Like you talk about like ramifications and internal rotation, right? Like that's a,
Yeah,
if you get your pelvis dumped forward, then it's going to look like you have all this internal rotation, but it's not. It's just coming from your low back, essentially.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Or they have to match that pressure by creating anterior compression, and now that they have no ER or hip rotation, which is what happens to most of my wides that do Nordic hamstring curls, and then they just have no hip range of motion, and
right?
then they go try to hit with their hitting coach, and they're like, "Well, I'm all up in my shoulders." Like, yeah, there you go, bud. I mean, the easiest way I explain it to people is think about what your spine needs to do to rotate, your thoracic rotation, and then hold your breath and lock all that shit together, and then try to swing. Not going to feel
Squeeze
the
your
same.
glutes,
Yeah,
brace
your, 'cause
your
your
glutes,
hamstrings
so
are weak.
your spine stable,
Yeah, because your hamstrings are
right?
weak. But
Do you talk about the same thing with like any sort of upper body strengthening? Like you're trying to posteriorly tilt the scapula, right? Like that's one that everyone's talking about with Armcare. Oh, you
uh-huh,
need to get that
uh-huh.
that posterior tilt. It's like okay, well, like maybe that side of their body is so stiff and tight because their center of mass went so far forward because they're a thrower, and like that's what you need
Yeah,
to produce high velocities on the mound.
yeah,
And then now we're squeezing even more from the back, which is going to push them even more forward, right? Like just round your shoulders, let your chest kind of like drop down, and then squeeze the back of your shoulders together. Like pinch your shoulders together. Try and bring your shoulders down and back, but then don't let the sternum expand. Like it's not going to end well. You literally just locked yourself up, and but
uh-huh.
you got the rotator cuff stronger, right? Like you strengthened your low trap and your serratus. Um, but
But
you
then
didn't
but then
expand
you're
the back of your
narrow, so
rib
now
cage,
yeah, so but you're narrow, so now your shoulder blade is absolutely stuck to your rib cage.
right? So I
So
mean that's kind of like
crazy.
interference. I was kind of one of the things that I put down in my notes was just like interference and what happens if you, yeah, I mean, like some common reset exercises or something,
Mhm.
maybe like how to prescribe it, like what it would look like in a warm up versus like adding it into Armcare post throwing stuff. I don't know,
Mhm.
like maybe just like what one of those guys range of motion programs. I guess is that the way you'd say it, or
Yeah.
mobility program.
Yeah. Yeah. Write that down in the notes for part 2, and I'll make sure that we attack something like that. I got back to, which I want to add the back to wall shoulder flexion test. I went through some stuff with that. So I like that one. I was talking with, I asked them to measure her ISA,
Oh, that's
and I
interesting.
didn't know how to, and I didn't know how to explain like narrow or wide. And so I just said, like, honestly, just give me like a goniometer measure. And all I got back was no asymmetries. And I was like, I had her do, she's a volleyball player. I had her do like, her posture photos, and there's definitely a rib cage twist. So I didn't get anything out. So I talking with him. I think another one we could do is if you just need someone else to film, but you can lie supine on your back on the ground or the table with your shirt off, or if it's a female like sports, as big of an inhale and as big of an exhale as they can. And
With
so
the arms overhead.
the camera's just on their midsection or even at the side, really. I mean, I like doing some arm reaching stuff if I'm really trying to look at like a dynamic offset and whatnot, but back and like a big old inhale, and you can start to see like it's a little bit better of a 3D representation of, I guess, the diaphragm and the rib cage. I mean, other than that, I was trying to rack my brain, and I feel like if we do a good job with posture photos, I don't know if we need a ton other than like the regular ones that we gonna do, like the standing toe touch. A toe touch can tell you so much, really, if you really break it down to the point where like I still rewatch all of those toe touch videos because I feel like I'm finding something new every day. And then, I mean, I think what it needs to be too, which I've been trying to get some guys to do, but like I think they need to videotape and send us all of their resets. I'm pretty sure it's really easy to video and link it in with the exercise. So I got to get on my guys that I have a little bit more.